Archie Harrison is 6 years old, and the one detail that just detonated this entire story is so brutally simple, it almost feels impossible to ignore. His own uncle has never met him. Not once, not at birth, not at a single birthday, not even by accident, and now Thomas Markle Jr. is stepping forward again, not quietly this time, but with a tone that feels less like anger and more like someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose, and what he is hinting at is not just family drama anymore, it's something much deeper, something that cuts straight into the narrative that has been built piece by piece in front of the entire world.
My opinion told Meghan, get out of my house. I think that's why they left.
If not, why not? Of the back of her kids' heads she posts on Instagram. Always the back of the head. No tantalizing pictures of the side of the face and all that.
Because when you strip away the headlines, the interviews, the polished appearances, what you're left with is a silence that has lasted for years. A silence so complete that Thomas Markle Jr. claims he has learned about Archie the same way strangers do, through newspapers, through screens, through carefully released images, and that detail alone, that one repeated claim, is what he is now pushing harder than ever. Almost like he's daring people to question why that door has never opened even slightly. And here's where it starts getting uncomfortable. Because Thomas isn't just repeating old grievances, he's building a pattern, a timeline that stretches back to before the royal wedding, before the world was watching, back to a time when Meghan Markle still had a visible connection to the family she grew up with, and according to him, that connection didn't explode in some dramatic moment. It faded, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until one day it was just gone, replaced by a version of the story that no longer included the people who were there at the beginning.
What happens if she loses Doria? Who's she going to have to turn to in the family that she hasn't thrown under the bus?
He describes watching that transformation from the outside, like someone standing behind glass while the entire narrative reshapes itself without him, and what he's suggesting now feels sharper than before. Because he's not just saying he was excluded, he's implying that the exclusion was necessary, that the story needed him gone, needed the family gone, needed certain details erased so a cleaner, more controlled version could take its place, and whether you believe that or not, the consistency of what he's been saying is what keeps dragging people back into this. Then rewind to just before the royal wedding, the moment that should have been the ultimate family milestone, and instead became the first major fracture in full public view, when Thomas Markle Jr. wrote that explosive letter warning Prince Harry, a letter that was dismissed at the time as bitterness, as attention-seeking, as something easy to ignore, but now, years later, he keeps pointing back to it like it was the beginning of everything, like that was the moment he tried to say something that nobody wanted to hear.
Meghan does admit that she actually had a great relationship with you up until the moment that she met Prince Harry.
And this is where the Archie part of the story starts to tighten, because when Archie was born, that should have been the reset, the moment where distance gets softened, where family lines get redrawn, but instead, according to Thomas, it became proof that nothing had changed, because once again he wasn't told directly, once again he wasn't included, once again he found out the same way the public did, and instead of lashing out, he says he did something unexpected, something that doesn't fit the villain narrative he's often been placed into. He asked publicly for a chance to be part of that child's life. That request, that plea, is what he now frames as the real turning point, because what followed wasn't conflict, it wasn't confrontation, it was silence, complete and total silence, and according to him, that silence is the actual story, not what was said, but what was never answered, not the accusations, but the absence of any response at all, and that's the part he keeps circling back to. Over and over again, like it's the one thing he cannot reconcile no matter how many years pass. And now, years later, with Archie growing up and that distance still untouched, Thomas Markle Jr. is no longer just talking about exclusion, he's hinting at something bigger, something that sounds like a claim that the version of events the world has accepted might not be the full picture, that there are details, small ones, personal ones, that never made it into the official story, and that those missing pieces are exactly what make this situation feel less like a family disagreement and more like a carefully maintained divide that no one on the inside is willing to explain. The next shift in this story doesn't come from a new interview or a dramatic confrontation. It comes from something far quieter and far more unsettling, because as the years move forward, the pattern Thomas Markle Jr. keeps pointing to doesn't break, it actually hardens, becoming more defined with every major public moment. And that's exactly what makes this latest push feel different, because now he's not just recalling what happened, he's connecting it, linking from one event to the next until it forms a chain that's almost impossible to ignore once you see it laid out in full. When the Global interview aired and Meghan Markle spoke about a childhood framed in a way that seemed to remove certain people entirely, that moment didn't just pass for Thomas Markle Jr. It stuck. It became another entry in what he has described as a growing list of contradictions, and the way he responded wasn't explosive. It was measured, almost clinical, like someone who had already expected it, like someone who had been watching the same pattern repeat so many times that nothing about it felt surprising anymore, and that calm reaction is what makes the claim land heavier, because it suggests this wasn't a one-off, it was part of something ongoing. And then the narrative expands again, not through confrontation, but through scale, because once the story moves onto global platforms, once documentaries and highly produced content begin shaping the public version of events, what Thomas Markle Jr. is reacting to isn't just personal anymore, it's permanent, it's recorded, it's something that can be replayed and absorbed by millions of people who have no access to any alternative version, and that's the part he keeps circling back to. The idea that the version being seen is complete, when from his perspective, it's missing entire sections that once existed. What makes this moment feel like a turning point is not a single statement, but the accumulation of all of them. Because as each new project appears, as each new retelling adds another layer, Thomas Markle Jr. responds in the same way, not by changing his story, but by repeating it, reinforcing it, almost like he's trying to keep a parallel record alive while everything else moves in a different direction. And the more that gap widens, the more his claims start sounding less like isolated complaints and more like a consistent counter-narrative that refuses to disappear. Then comes the moment that shifts the tone again, when instead of confrontation or criticism, Thomas Markle Jr. chooses apology, chooses to step back from the harshness of earlier statements and replace it with something that sounds more like regret, more like an attempt to reset everything that had already been said. And the detail that stands out isn't just the apology itself, it's what he includes in it, the names, the direct acknowledgement of Archie, written out by hand, as if putting it down in that form might somehow bridge a distance that nothing else had been able to cross. And yet, according to Thomas Markle Jr., that attempt disappears into the same silence that met everything before it. No reply, no acknowledgement, no indication that it was even received. And that's the point where his tone shifts again, because after that, the expectation of a response seems to fade completely, replaced by something else, something closer to resignation, but also something sharper, because instead of waiting, he begins pointing out what he believes are inconsistencies with more clarity than before. By the time the later appearances happen, by the time new content presents a version of life built around warmth, family, and connection, Thomas Markle Jr. is no longer reacting emotionally, he's dissecting it, picking out specific details, comparing them to what he remembers, and presenting those comparisons in a way that suggests he sees a gap between presentation and reality. And whether that gap is real or perceived, the fact that he continues to highlight it is what keeps the controversy alive. And now, with Archie growing older and the distance still unchanged, the claim that Thomas Markle Jr. is pushing feels less like a single revelation and more like a final piece being added to a long-running argument. Because what he's really saying isn't just about one moment or one decision, it's about a pattern that, from his perspective, has never broken. A pattern where every attempt to reconnect is met with silence, every statement is reframed, and every detail that doesn't fit the larger narrative simply never appears in it at all, leaving behind a version of events that feels complete on one side and unfinished on the other, with Archie at the center of a story that continues to grow while certain voices remain permanently outside of it.